Welcome to Nuclear Nightmares. In this episode, we present a review of arguably the most controversial film ever to be screened on US television. In 1983, Nicholas Meyer directed the film which would become the iconic centerpiece of Cold War popular culture. The Day After. Before we go any further, I should like to extend my gratitude to the Canal Raid adjacent website, whose article on The Day After is extensively researched and authoritative. Anyone wishing to learn more about this movie should certainly visit this site after viewing this video. Anyway, back to the film. Yay! As the long opening title sequence continues, we are treated to some spectacular aerial shots of Kansas City and the surrounding countryside. We are shown some heartwarming scenes of everyday folk going about their everyday lives. If a viewer did not know better, they would swear this was an advert for a Kansas real estate company. The areas surrounding Kansas City, the town of Lawrence and the surrounding heartland farms are presented to us in all their clean-shaven, all-American glory. The pace is brisk at the local Board of Trade, and a helpful TV news bulletin explains why. It would seem that the Soviets have decided to reinforce the inner German border to the point where invasion seems likely. The film does not dwell on this point for now. At the moment it just appears to be the usual posturing and saber-rattling we had all grown used to at this stage of the Cold War. For now, we just accept that the Russians have done this because they are just plain evil. Soon afterwards we are introduced to the film's main character, Dr. Oakes. He is presented as professional, warm-hearted and calm-headed. He will guide us through the arse-trembling horror which is to follow. I'm not sure why, but nearly all movies of this type contain an establishing shot with a caption or a piece of narration which tells us how far away we are from somewhere else. I think it might be in case any radiologists in the audience want to do some maths to kill the time before the film kills the characters. Anyway, Jim Dalbra and his family hang about at their local church because his daughter and boyfriend are late for their wedding rehearsal. They eventually show up and things proceed well enough for now. Marilyn Oakes meets her father at the Liberty Monument and takes him on a tour of the nearby art museum. She explains her intention of moving to Boston with her boyfriend. Dr. Oakes receives the news with some sorrow, but he generally accepts the situation. Such problems are small potatoes compared to the Hendry family, who have the dubious honor of living next door to a missile silo. Mrs. Hendry greets the purveyors of destruction before getting on with her washing. Dr. Oakes returns home and tries to speak to his wife about the situation regarding their daughter, before a newscaster breaks in to tell them that the East Germans have cut off the road links to West Berlin. Whenever the communists do this in one of these films, it usually means the characters on screen have a maximum of 20 minutes to live. This scene here was cut from the original TV broadcast but re-admitted to the DVD release. It shows a fight between Denise Dahlberg and her sister Jolene. Denise wanted to have a bit of fun with her betrothed, but Jolene has hidden her prophylactic. The censor was not happy about premarital relations even being alluded to. This is all the film does. We don't see anything happen, it is merely suggested by the script. So let me get this straight. Nuclear holocaust. Good. The suggestion of premarital relations. Bad. Fair enough. Dr. and Mrs. Oakes reminisce about the Cuban Missile Crisis which was going on when they were newlyweds. After a short trip down memory lane, the couple conclude that there probably won't be a war. Then, Mrs. Oakes asks the question which defines a whole generation and underlines the point of the film.
What if it does happen? What do we do?
The airman from the shot of the Hendry farm is having a bust-up with his missus. It's nothing like the outbreak of World War III to seriously sod up your holiday plans. After explaining that orders are orders, the airman patches things up with his wife and all seems to be okay. Back on the farm, Jim Dahlberg confronts his daughter who has been out all night gallivanting. After careful consideration, Jim concludes that life is too short and getting shorter with every passing news report. If Denise wants to have fun, then perhaps she should whilst there is still time. Dr. Oakes goes to see his son playing American football. This is significant for two reasons. It's another on the long list of cliches this film sadly has, but it's also the one and only time in the whole movie that any reference to Dr. Oakes having a son is ever made. We don't even see his face. On his way to the hospital, Dr. Oakes hears that NATO forces have engaged Soviet troops in East Germany and that the Soviets have bombed a school and a hospital in West Germany. After surgery, Dr. Oakes and his unnamed colleague discuss the end of the world and how Moscow had just been evacuated. It's still not clear whose fault all of this is, but one thing is certain, you have still enough time to shit your pants. In the nearby town of Lawrence, university freshmen are queuing for a medical exam.
Yeah, I wonder where we're going to be next week.
Somewhere in the upper atmosphere.
Holocaust humor. The purpose of this somewhat awkward scene is to introduce the character of Stephen, played by Steve Guttenberg, the scourge of 1980s cinema. As this character mercifully disappears from the screen, the filmmakers clearly think we have not had enough cliches yet and introduce a pregnant lady. All we need now is a guy with a heart condition and we are ready to do Airport 77 all over again. Bollocks to that. Whilst waiting in line to enroll for the next stage of his course, Denise's boyfriend, Bruce, is told that the Russians have just invaded West Germany. As other students huddle round the TV set, Meg Griffin from Family Guy remains a little skeptical.
The Defense Department today reported...
Fantasyland.
You think they're making this up? You think this is War of the Worlds or something?
Shut up, Meg.
Look, did we help the Czechs, the Hungarians, the Afghans, or the Poles? Well, we're not going to nuke the Russians to save the Germans. I mean, if you were talking oil in Saudi Arabia, then I'd be real worried.
As Steve hitches a lift home with someone who could be John Wayne Gacy for all he knows, Bruce decides to get his hair cut. The Four Horsemen barbershop quartet discuss such uplifting topics as launch on warning and their current proximity to primary targets. Oddly, no one seems bothered that they may be minutes away from being vaporized. As Dr. Oakes struggles against traffic to get home, the radio announces that a tactical nuclear exchange has taken place in Germany, leaving Frankfurt considerably smaller. People start to get the message that something is up and hit the megamart in a frenzy of panic buying. Bruce hears more news from another shopper who appears to have tuned into the Global Warfare Sports Network.
Any more news? We just hit one of our ships in the Persian Gulf. Who's they? The Russians, who do you think? We hit them back, one of their ships, you know?
And the crowd goes wild.
As the Hendry's children watch TV, we discover that low-yield nuclear weapons have been detonated over advancing Soviet troops. The news carries on reporting the ongoing nuclear escalation. As the crisis deepens, the Americans deploy stock footage of missile launches. On the Dahlberg farm, the level of denial from Jim's wife prevents her from going down into the basement on her own accord. This precipitates one of the most heart-rending scenes in all of nuclear cinema. On the airbase next to the Henry farm, our friendly neighborhood airman is refusing to soldier anymore.
Yeah, sure, man. Come on, make up your mind. Because you're either going to crawl down in that hole or you're going to shoot me in the back. So what does the book say, bozo?
Oh dear. He said bozo. If that's the standard of language from enlisted men under pressure, what's it like higher up the chain of command?
ABCDEFG News. With Dan and Dan.
Following the outbreak of hostilities between the superpowers this morning, President Reagan used a press conference to denounce the Soviet Premier Yuri Andropov as a poo-poo head.
As the shock of seeing Minuteman III missiles being launched causes widespread incredulity, Meg from Family Guy decides to ask the world's most stupid question.
The Minuteman missiles.
Like a test, sort of. Like a warning?
They're on their way to Russia. They take about 30 minutes to reach their target. So do theirs, right?
The answer soon arrives, as does a great deal of warmth. As you can probably imagine, things don't go so well for a lot of people from this point on. Numerous people are vaporized. The Hendrys don't manage to escape in time. Meyer line bursts into flames. And Danny Dalberg gets flash blinded. Having hitched as far as the outskirts of town, Stephen manages to shelter in a corner shop. It's a good thing for the ongoing narrative that Dr. Oakes has an atomic bomb-proof car. A dazed Dr. Oakes tries to make his way to Lawrence University Hospital. The science department is attempting to create some form of radio communication with the outside world. Chaos reigns at the university hospital as the doctors attempt to restore something resembling order. They don't seem to do so well as order looks like something no one really wants. Our friend the airman seems to have survived. He was able to hide in a trailer, sheltering in an all-metal container which has been exposed to temperatures in excess of 1000 degrees does not appear to have done him any harm. The doctors discuss the problems of trying to practice modern medicine without electricity or water. They are determined to do their best, but no one seems optimistic. Having emerged from the mini-mart, Stephen inadvertently wanders into the Dalberg farm. They are a bit suspicious of him at first, but allow him to shelter in their basement after he gives up some of his canned goods. The remaining hour of the film focuses on the attempts of the surviving cast to make any sense of what has happened. Denise Dalberg gets a dose of cabin fever and tries to flee the shelter. Survivors listen with incredulity as the president takes to the airwaves. The local preacher tries stoically to minister to his irradiated congregation. Local farmers receive crap advice from people who don't know what they are talking about. Jim Dalberg gets shot. Looters are executed. And Dr. Oakes visits the hole in the ground where his house used to be. As the movie draws to a close, Dr. Oakes is comforted by the survivor he found in what's left of his house. The mournful scene is voiced over by the head of the Lawrence Science faculty trying to contact other survivors with his ham radio.
That's it? That's all he's gonna say?
Some movie critics have suggested that The Day After is based on an episode of the 1950s TV show, Medic, entitled Flash of Darkness. This is hard to prove or disprove, the main similarity being that in a show involving doctors, the Russians get a bit pissed off about something or other and bomb the United States. The only strong fallback position this idea has is that no one made a nuclear attack episode of Dr. Kildare. The point worth raising is that the show's director, John Meredith Lucas, would have had a tougher time pitching this idea to a TV network in the 1950s than Meyer did with ABC. That's not to say that all was plain sailing for him. The idea for the film originally came from ABC executive Brandon Stoddard. He had been impressed with the China syndrome and wondered how you would make a movie depicting a nuclear war in America. Stoddard realized that making such a harrowing TV movie might be a tall order for a network with such an overtly family-orientated output. He eventually hired veteran TV writer Edward Hume to pen the piece, and after exhausting other options turned to feature film director Nicholas Meyer to steer the project. The original plan was to make a two-part miniseries, each part being roughly 2 hours long. After several rewrites, Hume eventually came up with a script which the executives at ABC would find acceptable. Meyer was a bit dubious about the project. He did not believe that the average American would tune in 2 nights in a row to watch Armageddon. Furthermore, he felt that the FCC would not allow some of the scenes in Hume's original script. Meyer embarked on an exhaustive piece of research to find out all he could about the effects of nuclear war. This made him extremely fearful of the future, and actually quite ill. Nevertheless, the whole 4-hour project was filmed, but soon afterwards ABC agreed with Meyer's previous point and reduced the running time to 2 hours. ABC execs wanted some scenes excised from the movie. This included reducing the attack sequence. The original is considerably longer than the one we see even in the DVD release, as well as scenes showing army officers being executed for desertion and a scene where a child awakes screaming after suffering a nightmare. Meyer fought to keep the footage he had shot, but ABC would not budge. Eventually both sides compromised and the screening went ahead 2 years after the script was completed. The film was given a great deal of promotion before it was finally screened in the autumn of 1983. ABC even went to the lengths of providing viewers guides and a helpline manned by trained psychotherapists. As it turned out, most of the phone calls ABC received after the airing were people's general opinion of the film, which was viewed by 100 million people across the United States. This film polarized opinion at the time and still continues to do so. Some deride it as anti-American propaganda, others believe it is too tame. On that last point I do have some sympathy. Some of the scenes are pretty hokey and a bit contrived. It's worth remembering though that it was written by a man who had made his career in television, and if you are trying to make a film that will reach the largest possible audience, it does at least have to be watchable. Returning to the point about scenes which were cut because censors deemed them too harrowing, an unexpurgated attack sequence would have been a good 6 or 7 minutes longer and would have included a view of the destruction of Kansas City from the window of an approaching airliner, people suffocating in their shelters as the firestorm sucked up all the oxygen, people being eviscerated by the blast wave, others again being dismembered by flying glass and debris, people having their faces burned off and the sight of human flesh being carbonized by the intense heat. All of this would have been viewed at around 8:30 on a Sunday evening. I wonder if the Sci-Fi Channel will repeat it as often as it does with those bits left in. Even without those parts, the day after started a movement not just among American viewers but among policymakers too. A congressional committee voted to do all it could to ensure that the film was made available to viewers behind the Iron Curtain and in the Soviet Union in particular. This wish was granted in 1987. U.S. President Ronald Reagan viewed the film and was said to have been greatly moved by it. How much Meyer's film had to do with the Icelandic Arms Reduction Summit we shall never know. If the film was as gruesome as it was originally intended, it would have shed its disaster movie look and perhaps even given Threads a run for its money. But I think it would have been less influential too. That's all for this episode. I do hope you will join us next time on Nuclear Nightmares, but until then remember,
you are better off in your own home. Stay there.
No Kylie, no Jason, no toothpaste round the basin. By golly, we're jolly, jolly's what we are. No slimming, no jogging, no slurping, public snogging. We're after some laughter, ha 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 ha. No Kylie, no Jason, no toothpaste round the basin. By golly, we're jolly, jolly's what we are. No slimming, no jogging, no slurping, public snogging. We're after some laughter, ha 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 ha. No Kylie, no Jason, no toothpaste round the basin.